Okay, just before we begin, I just want to make sure everybody can hear us. David, are you there?
Yep.
Great. We'll start just momentarily. All right. We will begin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, And the Beat Goes On, How to Get Legacy Donors and Prospects in the 21st Century, presented by David Love, Godfather of Good with Agents of Good. My name is Erin Kuhns, and I'm the Manager, Education and Training at CAGP, and I'm really happy you could join us today. I have a few quick things to mention before we get started. David has a lot of information here for you today, and he will try to squeeze in a Q&A session at the end. To submit your questions anytime, simply type them in the questions box on your GoToWebinar panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If he's unable to get to your question today, he's also more than happy to take your questions afterwards via email. You have received a link to the Dropbox folder, which contains a PDF copy of this webinar, as well as David's bio and a CFRE tracker sheet. If you have not received this, please let me know and I'd be happy to send it to you. This webinar is worth 1 CFRE credit, and as with all of our webinars, today's presentation will be recorded and you'll be receiving an email with a link to the recording afterwards. It will also be available on our website very shortly as well. Okay, thank you so much for being here today, David. I will let you take it from here.
Thanks, Erin. Good afternoon, sisters and brothers, and thank you for the introduction, Erin. And thanks also for all of you folks tuning in this afternoon, and also to many CAGP colleagues, Doug Puffer, Michelle Osborne, Denise Fernandez, Paul Nazareth, and a flotilla of others for helping to negotiate the webinar world through their great examples. This is a picture of yours truly in the early 1970s. In September of this year, I celebrated 50 years in fundraising. It's been a wild ride, and most of my work has been in the area of conserving the environment, starting with pollution probe. And I can tell you that in 1969, no one knew how to spell the word the environment, let alone think about it as an important issue. But my, how times have changed. Every day we hear about environmental issues, and we're often told that these may be the most challenging issues we face over the next 25 years. In short, we have finally learned that we will rely on a healthy planet. And times have changed in fundraising too. The most significant change is the slow realizations, like the importance of the environment, that great fundraising is about the donor. And this led to a refreshing fundraising movement called donor-centered fundraising. And as a donor to many charities, I say hooray. And we capture it, the fundamental easy thing to do. We capture the essence of donor-centered fundraising by making a very subtle change from what your organization does to what your donors make possible. I have to tell you, I regret my fundraising career is winding down now, because the next 30 years are going to be a golden age in fundraising. Why is that? Well, I go back to one of my favorite stories for the answer. Willie Sutton, in the 1920s, Willie Sutton kept robbing banks, but the bad news was that Willie wasn't any good at it. So the police finally caught Willie for the third or fourth time, and an exasperated cop finally says, "Willie, why do you rob banks?" And Willie looked at the cop, rolled his eyes and said, "Because that's where the money is." My friends, as fundraisers, we spend our lives chasing money, and over the next 30 years, there's going to be a lot of it. That's because we're going to see the largest transfer of wealth from one generation to another in history. A recent number I heard puts this into perspective, was $200 million a day, every day for 10 years. That's a lot of money, an unprecedented opportunity for charities to raise enough money to actually accomplish their mission. For an old environmentalist, it just might be enough money to make serious progress in rescuing the planet. This money will come in the form of legacy gifts, which mean this kind of giving is about to take center stage. And that slide just looks at the various numbers and ways that legacy gifts happen. As we all know, 90% of them or more are gifts and wills, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the amount of money is not reason enough. There is one more. The boomers are coming. Actually, the boomers are going. This huge cohort of Canadians are entering old age. The oldest boomers turned 72 in 2018. They will be 80 in 2026, just 8 years away. The youngest boomers turned 53 in 2018. They'll be 80 in 2045. While we wondered whether this narcissistic generation would care about leaving a legacy, excellent research by our good friends at GoodWorks confirms that they will. And that's just a quick summary of the work that Fraser and the gang did at GoodWorks, which says that boomers are going to be as generous in their will as civics. And as the number, as the note at the bottom of the slide says, while a smaller percentage made wills, keep in mind they outnumber civics by more than 2 to 1. Boomers do want to go out with a bang, and it's not going to be uncommon for boomers to start making their own special plans for their funeral. So the golden age is upon us for the next 40 years, and then it's over. This window will close. There are other reasons that the time is right for legacy fundraising, and here are 3. The civics are still with us, and bless them, they will remain generous to the end. Second, you will get the best return on investment out of any fundraising activity by using legacy gifts. This slide suggests that you raise $2 million on an investment of $200,000 for a return on investment of 900%. Third, legacy fundraising is all about donor-centered fundraising. The donor is at the very heart of the legacy process. So the pump is prime for legacy gifts, and we're going to spend the next few minutes looking at how to get them. We in the legacy business are unique in fundraising. That's because we never close the gift. While the sales mantra in our annual programs and major gift programs lifted from Glengarry Glen Ross is always be closing, this is not what legacy fundraisers do ever. Nope, our precious donors close the gift. A great legacy program unfolds in 3 acts. In Act 1, we spend our time getting our legacy contacts. We find donors and we find prospects. One of the easiest way to do this is through a letter, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Act 2, we create essential legacy materials. There are 2 main pieces. The Why brochure, an example here from our friends at Ontario Nature, which essentially says, why should I leave? A great story answers every potential legacy donor's key question, why should I leave a legacy to this organization? The second essential material, brimming with firmly practically answers, is answers the question, what do I need to do this? And here's an example from our friends at War Child. We call this the how letter, which allows people to see it's not that difficult. It's fairly easy. There's steps they need to take. It's nice and friendly. And there's Brock there calling himself, by the way, a legacy donor support person, not some crazy fundraising title that makes no sense to anybody except maybe an organization. In Act 3, we do a love story. We create and implement our legacy donors and prospects love story, a series of high quality, inspiring, relevant, donor-centered communications in many channels. In most cases, this love story will unfold over many years. Some of your legacy intenders are beginning a 30-year relationship with you. This webinar is taking a detailed look at only Act 1. We will conclude with a few remarks on Act 3, looking after our legacy donors and prospects, because this is our greatest challenge, because as you're about to find out, getting donors and prospects is easy. First, a little fundraising history. In the old days, philanthropists were rich people. Here are 2 fine examples. The first is my great-grandfather on my dad's side. His name was William Gage, a diligent athletic farm boy from Brampton. He worked hard, and by the time he retired, he had established one of Canada's best-known publishing companies, W.J. Gage, known by some elders tuning into this webinar as the creators of Dick and Jane, and who can forget Spot. Later in life, when he was a wealthy man, he became a philanthropist. The cause he most cared about was TB, and he established the first sanatorium in Canada in Muskoka, and then established the second on the outskirts of Toronto in the early 1900s. He was knighted for his work and became Sir William Gage. The second is my great-grandfather on my mother's side. He came from a poor family in Peterborough, and like William Gage, worked hard all his life. By the time he retired, he created a huge meatpacking business in Toronto. Once again, with his substantial wealth, he too became a philanthropist, helping to establish the University of Toronto and the Toronto General Hospital. He was also knighted and became Sir Joseph Flavelle. Perhaps now you can see why I have spent 50 years in fundraising. Philanthropy is in my genes. But unlike my esteemed great-grandparents, I am not rich. But by the mid-60s, you didn't need to be rich to give money to important causes. The essential driver of this revolution was direct mail, and it was in the 60s that some of the largest charities in the world were formed: Amnesty, Greenpeace, WWF, UNICEF, and many, many more. Suddenly, the world was filled with donors. Philanthropy had become democratic. And you can guess what happens next. Planned giving, which was even more the playground of the rich, became accessible to everyone. We all know now that everyone can be moved to leave a legacy gift. Sure, they need to have the essentials of life looked after, but after that, they look to make the world a better place. One of the first people in Canada to figure this out was the irrepressible Ken Ramsey, who began his work in the fundraising trenches of the United Church, but saw such potential for legacy giving that he established Legacy Leaders, a company that today still does excellent work on legacies. It was Professor Ken, he now teaches planned giving at Humber, who proved that marketing legacies could be done on a mass scale. And I remember him showing me this drawing in the many, many years ago, I think in the 80s or the early 90s, and it is simply packed with meaning. And I recommend you take a look at this at a different when you have more time, because this says all you need to know about how you can broadly market legacies, and you have a number of audiences who are just waiting to hear this message. Ken's success encouraged more and more thinking and innovation to help organizations find legacy donors. Today, there are several options, which we will look at one at a time. Most of these have been tested many times and are guaranteed to get you legacy prospects. The only two questions you'll need to ask after that are, how can you get the budget to find legacy donors and prospects? And how much are these donors and prospects actually worth? These are such crucial questions. We'll take a short intermission in the middle of our survey of methods to answer both of them. This webinar is meant to point you in the right direction, so let's take a look at getting legacy donors. When we look at the various ways you can get legacy donors, I will simply direct you to the current folks who do this work. Given the huge opportunity we've talked about, and given that asking properly for legacies is what our precious donors want, it's not surprising that most fundraising consultants have strong legacy programs. At the end of this webinar, I'll provide a list of those folks who are doing the best legacy work in the country. It'll be up to you to determine which agency and approach will best suit your needs. Of course, this will determine by your donors. How are they recruited? How long have they been with you? What is their preferred means of communication? Legacy fundraising, as I said before, is the most donor-centered of all. Your donors will determine your approach. So we're going to start by taking a one-by-one look through these 7 ways. And this is before the intermission, of course. There are 4 more after this. These 7 ways that you can find legacy donors. Nothing ever will replace face-to-face. The best fundraising in the world happens face-to-face, and that's because people give to people. So whenever possible, engage in this time-offered, effective approach, and it will also provide you with some of the most wonderful, heartwarming stories you'll ever heard. It sparked magic And magic is at the heart of all legacy gifts. Its only limitation is that you can't personally have a conversation with a large number of donors. If your charity's been around a long time, if it has been and continues to do great work, you've got some loyal donors, you need to find other ways to get legacy commitments. But let's not forget face-to-face. It will always be the best. Second are legacy events. This naturally follows face-to-face. Most organizations host wonderful legacy events, and make no mistake, the purpose of these events is to get new legacy commitments. Much has been written about how to do this right, and I have some suggestions, and there are some suggestions later. But to make this more alive, here are two examples. The first is an invitation to a tax planning seminar with a difference. These seminars are wonderfully enjoyable. They're creative. The donors, the visitors go away feeling really good about them, and they're really good. They're really good events. They're run by a outfit called the Donor Motivation Program, and if you're interested, I suggest you have a look at it. It's a really good event. It is not a financial advisor at 7:30 in the library talking about taxes and tax benefits. No one will go to those. The second is a slightly more obvious one, which is an invitation to an event. This is a walk that World Wildlife Fund had for some people at Tommy Thompson Park, the Leslie Street Spit, for those of you who don't know, in the bottom of Toronto. And we invited some donors to come for a little walk and see bird banding and a bunch of other things on a lovely day in May. And it was a lovely event. These events can be fabulous. You can put the mission right in front of these folks, and they're just really good ideas. That particular event, by the way, just to give you some numbers, because I figured it's interesting to have numbers, we went in with the goal of finding 2 legacy donors, people who were going to move from I'm thinking about it to I've done it, and we wanted to have a number of people who were prepared to think about it. And that event cost $5,000, found us 2 donors, and found us 23 prospects. The third event, I was kind of wondering where I should put this, but now in Canada, there is a program called Free Wills. This has been very popular in the UK. Some organizations it's so popular, they've actually run their own free will program. And now it's established in Canada. And essentially, it's a service that allows your donors to make a will for free. You invite them to an event, and they get a will for free with no obligation. It's now active in Canada. A number of charities have tried it. And if you're interested, you can find out more by, I think it's called capacitymarketing.ca. One of the easiest ways that people find legacy prospects is to put a tick box on certain donor communications. This is an example of World Wildlife Fund's renewal program. One of the most important meetings of the year to these people, which they get all the time. These donors know what this is about, so they know they're to renew their support. But you can see that the whole second page that invites them to share their passion for nature with future generations. And these donor tick box opportunities often work and will surface at least legacy prospects and sometimes even legacy donors. These tick boxes, of course, can be on other things. They can be in newsletters, and they can be in other communications you have with your donors. Just make sure they're not organization centered, but they're about donors. You can also some people use the mail and the phone. This approach uses highly qualified, personalized mail appeals with top quality phone follow-up. In 1995, led by Ken, Legacy Leaders, which pioneered this approach, opened its doors. This infographic shows you how their basic approach works. And essentially, it's a mail with a phone and then a mail again. It's proven effective for many, many organizations. So if you want to take a look at this, it's a way that you can certainly find new legacy donors. However, the most common one, and perhaps the easiest, is our good old friend direct mail. And there are at least three separate options here: a single long letter, a letter survey, a letter series, and a survey. We'll take a quick look at all three. A single letter like this goes to a list of highly qualified donors. A number of agencies rely on the mail doing the bulk. Here, there's a long, thoughtful letter encouraging donors to make a legacy gift. This is a recent example. It's not that recent, actually, it's quite old, but it worked really well and continues to work. And it is a 4-page, thoughtful, this is not a letter you read and rush to your checkbook or rush to your phone. This is a letter you read and put aside and read again and put aside. It's a different kettle of fish. And of course, it does have a reply, which people send back, and they can say, of course, the most important part of the reply is whether they're going to do it or not, but there's other little bits and pieces to get people more interested in doing it, because the more you ask people about themselves, the more they're prepared to start thinking about making a legacy gift. The second is to do a series, and our friends at GoodWorks, who did that fantastic research, are the very best at this. They send 3 letters, and you can see over 3 letters to the same 3,000 people over three different letters, one in March, one in August, one in February, and then they follow up, do some telemarketing follow up in March and April by the time all these letters have gone. One's from a staff person, and 2 are donor stories. There's an example of what happened when we did this at World Wildlife Fund. The results are really good. It cost us about $70,000, and we found 46 donors and 145 prospects. And the third thing to do in the mail is a survey. And here's an example of a mail survey from our friends at Bird Studies Canada. People are getting better and better and better at this. And great research shows that a survey can be very effective. Through a series of donor-friendly questions, people can be warmed up before they're asked about the possibility of leaving a legacy gift. This is a powerful way to do this, and it works really well, and it is really quite inexpensive, and it also gets some great results. There's an example of World Wildlife Fund survey. The same kind of thing, a nice introductory letter, a full color survey, asking some questions which lead people along the way till you finally get to the question that makes the difference. And I think in this case, it's question 8. There are the results. Again, those are pretty good results. With an investment of $35,000, we find 9 donors and 56 prospects. Of course, you can use the phone. Some people use the phone to do this, and this goes back to our conversation earlier about how if your file is highly phone responsive, then the phone will work very well. But you need to remember that we all need to remember that when asked which method donors dislike the most, it is often the telephone. So you need to use this with some care, but that's not to say there are some agencies out there who do very good work on the phone. And if your file is phone responsive, you may find that this can become a very effective method. Of course, follow-up needs to be done by mail or email. My last one before the intermission is door-to-door. We're all very familiar with door-to-door in acquiring monthly giving programs. And as far as I'm aware, no organization has the nerve to try door-to-door for legacy commitments. But someone's going to do this. And by the way, if it's done properly, I think it can work. I think the right person, asking the right person to think about making a legacy gift at the door would actually work well. I don't think it would be intrusive. I think it could be personally quite engaging. And I think the time will come when someone has the nerve to do this. And I'd love to know if someone on the phone, if someone listening in this webinar has had a chance to thinking about doing legacy gifts door to door. I would not do it on the street. I would not do it in the mall. I would do it in someone's home. Okay, I promised that at the intermission, we would take a look at 2 questions. And they are, how can you get prospects, and how much is legacy donors and prospects worth? Getting the investment. I have 3 suggestions for you. All 3 of these ideas have been stolen from other people. The first one is to ask your senior management and or your board to invest between 5 and 10% of received unrestricted legacies into getting more gifts. Even following the simplest methods so far, like tick boxes on communication to loyal donors, you will receive legacy gifts, and most will be unrestricted. You may find boards asking boards to give money that they don't have works. And we built the World Wildlife Fund Legacy Program precisely this way, by convincing the board to invest a percentage of unrestricted gifts into finding more. The second, which I learned from Denise Fernandez in a recent CAG webinar, is to ask your senior management to slightly increase the amount you invest in getting legacy gifts. The example she gave was to ask for a small increase in the cost per dollar raised. So in this little example here, you remember our ROI example, we raised $2 million with $200,000. That cost a dime to raise $1. Maybe your senior manager would let you spend 15 cents to raise $1, and suddenly you would have much more to invest in the legacy program. And by the way, I can tell you, my friends, I probably don't need to tell you this, that will still be the best cost per dollar raised of any activity your organization does. Events may be 50-50, great annual programs may be 30-70, and great major gift programs can sometimes be 15 cents or less, but legacy programs are going to be the best cost per dollar raised. So maybe ask for a couple more pennies, a couple more cents, literally a couple more cents in Denise's example, to put in legacies. And the last one are for those who have got an endowment fund of some kind. You may all know that it's now sitting earning almost nothing in interest, and I appreciate the reason we all have endowment funds. However, someone might be able to convince the board to make a one-time, it can even be a loan out of your endowment fund, which you'll pay back once you get these legacy gifts in the door. You take a loan out of the endowment fund, and so instead of earning some paltry percentage rate that goes to the bank, you're actually using some of this money to create a vigorous legacy program, and you can spend it on some of the 11 methods that we're talking about in this webinar. So that's how you get the investment. But how much are they worth? So how much are these people actually worth? And so I just decided I would take a look at an organization that had 150 legacy donors and 300 prospects. So to be clear, said you are in my will, and that 300 donors who are saying, I'm thinking about putting in my will. And my friends, when I do the math, that's worth $21.6 million. And here's how I get it. The number of donors times 4, and the reason it's times 4 is because every legacy gift you know about, you will get 4 more. That's a number that is true across the country. So for every one of those 150 donors who've told you, there are 4 more who haven't. So that means you've got actually 600 legacy donors, and then times the average legacy gift in Canada is $30,000. So suddenly you're looking at $18 million. On the prospect side, we're being a little more conservative. You take your prospects and say 1 out of 10 will do it. And then you do the same math, times 4, because for everyone who tells you you'll get 4 who won't, times the average legacy gift, which is $30,000. So you now have 120 people times $30,000 for 3.6 million. So if you've been following along, that's how much just 150 donors and 300 prospects could be worth over time. It's the kind of numbers that might get your board and your finance committee a little excited. And it is our obligation sometimes, I think, to show that this legacy fundraising is, at the end, going to raise a lot of money for a good cause. Okay, we go back to our list of ways we're going to do this, and how to calculate how to get more legacy gifts. So we talked about face-to-face events, tick boxes, mail phone, mail only, the phone, and door-to-door. There are 4 more we want to talk about, and I'll show you some examples. They are online, website, TV video, and social media. Online is becoming a really fantastic way to do this, and I'll show you an example of an online program. This is one from World Wildlife Fund, where we send an email to another, actually to a fairly large number of donors. In this case, we'd send it to 18,000 of them, and they are asked to help with a brief survey. Like the mail survey, it's a survey which is deeply, carefully formatted to give a donor a chance to think about themselves for the first little while, and then finally, around question 8 again, you get around to asking the question about whether you're considering a legacy gift. It's actually, as you can see, in this case, it's question 6, when we actually get around to asking whether they would consider a gift in their will. And the results to this, my friends, has been stunning. World Wildlife Fund spent about $10,000, found 93 donors, and found 1,156 prospects. It's a fantastic program, and it just shows the power of online. It's essentially an online survey. Next one's a website. There are lots of things happening on websites, and there's some really good examples out there of doing some good website work. Here's an example of one that is from our friends at WaterAid. Some produce tangible results with donors confirming gifts and becoming prospects asking for more information. The website often includes all sorts of brochures and stuff you can ask for. This is our friends at WaterAid. And you can see that on the website, they don't mess around with being overly subtle. Include the wonderful gift of water in your will. It's very direct. It's right there. They can see it. And as you can imagine, there's all sorts of things you can see as you look over this website. Another example here is our friends from Carleton University in Ottawa, our friend Doug Puffer, actually. And once again, here's a website that allows all sorts of things, all sorts of ways people can see what they can do and find out what they can have. And you can see there's all sorts of guides they can offer. There are all sorts of brochures they can get by clicking on the website and going through it and seeing what can happen and how it works. There's no doubt that people using websites are doing this very well these days, and there are more and more of them, and it will become a really, really good way to find new legacy donors and prospects. Some organizations use TV and video to acquire legacy donors and prospects. There's huge potential here. We know that legacies are essentially gifts from the heart. They're gifts of emotion. They're gifts that people make thinking about living in perpetuity. So there's no surprise that a really well-made video on television or in any format can move people to do it. I've included 2 examples here, which I'm not going to run because I didn't know I was going to run out of time or not. I'm not going to, but anyway, there's a couple of examples here you can find when you get a chance. This is the Alzheimer's Society. You go on YouTube, you can see this story that this woman tells. And then, of course, our friends at Sick Kids have a fabulous number of videos which will move people to make a legacy gift. So video is another hugely powerful way to make a legacy gift. And then finally, we have social media. People talk about, will it ever be used to acquire legacy donors and prospects? And the answer is the jury's out. But there are some people who are trying to do it very well. And here are the people who are very good at it. This is the National Lifeboat Association, the Royal Lifeboat Association in the UK. They have a whole section on their Facebook page inviting people to make a gift in their will to get those people out to help rescue craft that are in trouble in the oceans across the UK. And our friends at UNICEF have a wonderful video that I recommend you go and have a look at if you get a chance. A wonderful video in their Facebook page, which allows you to create essentially your own legacy video, and it's a very powerful piece. I said I would touch on this, and I am just going to touch on it because um, that's we've looked at 11 methods you can use to find legacy donors, and I'm confident in a year or two there'll be 2 or 3 more. You simply need to stay connected with the fabulous research being done in the legacy field to see what's new. And those of you who have heard me speak before, you'll hear me talk all the time about keeping your ear to the ground on the best research is being done in Canada, the UK, and the US on legacy research. Much of this, certainly much of the work on donor surveys has come from our friend, Dr. Russell James at Texas Tech in the US. I promised I'd end with a few thoughts about this, and I'm actually going to dodge the question altogether, but what I'm going to say is that I think you can now see that, frankly, getting these donors and getting these prospects is not as difficult as it was even 5 years ago. It's now, there are great agencies out there. There are great people doing some great work. There are all these methods you can use. It's now a matter of choosing the one that works best for your donors and just doing it. And sure enough, at the end of the day, you'll have a bunch of intenders or donors and have a prospect. And the thing to do is how in heaven's name you go after it. And we briefly talked about this wonderful idea, which is a string of communications through all channels in all ways, including voice broadcasts and surprises and videos and emails and maybe birthday cards and who knows, a whole bunch of communications that people get to make them feel really good about the fact that they are going to remember you and they will. And we at the agents do not shy away from saying this is called a love story, and that's exactly what it should be. So once again, I showed a slide earlier about this, and you can have a look at this when you get more time. There's a love story grid for our friends at Ontario Nature, and it just writes down what they get, why they get it, what's it for. The third one down is called feeling. That's really important. Legacy gifts are about what people feel, and so you can find your way to create your own legacy love story. But the really good news is that if you're really keen to hear way more about the legacy love story, my daughter Jen and I are going to be presenting a whole session about just this at the CAGP National Conference in Montreal. So a plug for our friends at CAGP. I can't recommend highly enough that people go and have a look and think about coming to Montreal. A lovely town to be in April, by the way. And come and hear Jen and I essentially tell you what the latest and greatest from around the world in donor legacy love stories, because that is where the action is going to be. Now, Aaron, I had no idea how long this was going to take. As you can see, it took about 40 minutes. So we have plenty of time for questions if we have some. And if we don't,
we do have questions, yes.
I'm glad to hear that, Aaron, because I'm out of gas. I didn't know how long it was going to take me. It took me a little shorter than I thought. So, okay, let's go.
Great, David. Okay, so yes, we do have some questions, and I will just remind people that to go ahead and if they have more questions, just to submit them, and if we can get to them, we will. All right, so here's the first question. If you're trying to build a donor pipeline from the ground up, starting with nothing, is it worth it to look at doing a Canada Post mail drop by postal code when considering the ability to get donors is your pipeline versus the cost? Thanks so much. Do you want me to repeat that?
Well, that's a what a wonderful question. That would be my last. That would be the last thing we'd try to. I mean, the way to create. It depends on what the cause is. It's all about finding creative ways to let people know that you have a burning cause, a burning problem that needs to be solved. You're a charity in Canada that wants to get going. You want to get started. And I think there's got to be a way to maybe cheap newspaper ads, even social media. I wouldn't put much hope on postal drop with Canada Post because I just think it's too scattered. You need to find a better way to, if you can, qualify who might be interested in your offer in the work you're doing to save the world think deeply about how you might find people like that and go from there.
Great. Do you ready for the next one?
Yeah, I'm not overly happy with that answer, but anyway, yep.
Okay. um, so right near the beginning of the webinar, you had this question that was, what is a civic?
What is a civic? A civic is the generation after boomers. So if the boomers were born, the first boomers were born in 1946, all the civics are born prior to that. So from 19, the people who are now in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. Actually, boomers are in their 70s. Boomers started the 70s. So civics are people who are in their late 70s, early 80s, and 90s. And
Great, thank you.
they are a very generous group who believe that who bless them, who still think it's an obligation to do things for charity. So they're a very, very receptive audience to a legacy gift.
Great. Okay, somebody did ask the question about door-to-door, asking, did you mean cold calling at the door or visiting your own donors to do this?
Oh, what a great question. I think going to your own donors is a brilliant idea if you could figure out how to do that, especially with volunteers. I just think it's an area that no one has. I think it's an area that no one has looked at with any kind of intelligence, and whoever asked that question is obviously thinking about it intelligently, by the way. So I would think cold would be okay, but you wouldn't be cold, right? You'd do all sorts of work on how old the people are. You'd look at the car in the driveway. You'd do all sorts of things to sort of qualify the house you're going to go to. But I think potentially going to your donors door to door with the legacy offer, deeply thought through with real care, is definitely a possibility. I'd love to see that happen because I think in the end of the day, and this comes from when people will know this who know what I do anyway. This is actually all about donors, giving donors the chance to do something they all want to do. This is why legacy fundraising is the most exciting fundraising we do. It's a matter of giving people a chance to do something every single person wants to do. And it's our even obligation to give them a chance to do that in their own way, in their own time. And I think there are people who would respond well to an invitation carefully crafted at the door.
Great. Here's another question. What is the times 4 calculation again? Can we review where the number is derived from?
Sure. And it's important because those of you in the seminar, I've got some homework for you all to do. It's really important to find out. One of the things you can find out about your database is find out about the dearly departed. We call it the dead speak at World Wildlife Fund. Go back to see the people who've actually left you a legacy gift. Get a wonderful student in there and just go back through your files. The last gift the person gives you is not, in fact, the money they give you in their legacy. The last gift they give you is to tell you what kind of person they were. Where did they live? How old were they? What did they do? And if you do that, and at World Wildlife Fund, we went back and looked at 380 people. If you do that, you'll find that only 1 out of 4 people tell you they're going to leave you in their will. So for everyone who tells you, there are 4 who are going to do it. Now that assumes what's the word for it? Passionate, donor-centered, intelligent, exciting, energizing legacy program. And those words apply to not many legacy programs I can think of in this country currently. I think they will be certainly because folks on the webinar will get better and better at it. But I think the point is that these people are looking for a chance to leave this gift. And one of the things you can do is find out how many people left the gift to you in their will. As I said, at World Wildlife Fund 380. How many were donors? How many actually told you they were going to do it? And how many didn't tell you? And the research is out there, and our friends at Good Works Again will confirm that for every 1 who tells you, there are 4 who won't. That's where the math comes from.
Great, thank you. And one person posted right as we started the Q&A, how long does it take to realize these gifts? 10, 15 years?
Oh no, 3 to 5. I mean, if you get get at it with some passion and some uniqueness and some opportunity. No, no, it's within 3 and 5 years. I mean, yeah, it's you'll start receiving these gifts sooner than you think. Part of this is predicated on the boomers, and I am one, and I'm all of 72 years old, so I'm one of the boomers. The boomers are not going to leave the planet for another, I'm kind of hoping, 20 years.
Me too.
So they will take a little longer to make the legacy gift, but those, if you start a program now and engage civics and others, you will get legacy gifts sooner rather than later. And the length of time, I'm going to say it one more time, this is not about the money. Legacy fundraising, even though it is unbelievably lucrative, and even though there's all that money on the table, this is about giving Canadians a chance to do the right thing that they wanted to do all their lives, which is to be remembered by the charities and the values they hold dear for their lives. This is about values and letting people express those values as much as it is about the good old money. It just so happens that doing that is also extremely lucrative.
That's great. And I'll just mention that I don't think everybody knows that your daughter Jen, your co-presenter at the conference, is in the room with you right now. That was her yelling, "Me too," in the background.
that was her yelling. Yeah. She's kind of hoping I last to 92. She can wait for her inheritance.
So more questions. Here's one. Can you talk a bit more about the e-survey that you used to discover legacy gifts?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the easiest thing for me to do is to suggest you go and talk to, and I'll get to, we'll talk to some people who do it in Canada. I know that Marcus Smart does it. If that person, the thing to do is that whoever asked that question, I asked you to email me. And by the way, anybody on this call, you could probably tell, I'm obsessed with this, okay? I'm obsessed with legacy fundraising and of us doing it right. So I'm happy to answer each and every email I get personally, quickly. And I would prefer that that person wrote me a little email, because what I could send you is I could actually send you the sample. I could let you see how it works. And that's by far the best way to see this.
That's great. What is one of your favorite questions to be asked in an online legacy survey?
Oh, the favorite question is, why is nature, if it's a nature group, why is nature so important to us? Tell us a story about your favorite moment in nature. And then Canadians, as you know, this is why the environmental movement stands, I think, to benefit greatly if they do this right. The Canadians have magical nature moments. And what you do in a survey, you just start asking questions about magical nature moments. And sure enough, all that happens, you can see it. All that happens, you suddenly, first of all, for the first time, this organization is actually talking about me, not about them. For many organizations, that's a change. This survey is not about the organization. These donors don't need to hear how great you are. They all know that. They wouldn't be with you if they didn't. What this survey does, it says, you know what? Actually, you're great. And we want to hear your stories, because we just know that your stories are going to be really inspiring and interesting. And they may help others make a legacy gift and blah, blah, blah. So the most important questions are the ones that warm your heart up. Now, people know that this work about the good old brain, and we now know that legacy gifts come from your part of your brain, where every single person on this webinar has a corner in their brain where they're keeping their life story. You are squirreling away your memories in a little corner of your brain where you're essentially writing your autobiography. That is the survey needs to start opening that Pandora's box of memories. That's the best way I can put it.
That's a great answer. Another question. What are your thoughts on non-event related radio advertising for your foundation?
Radio advertising for what? For legacies?
It says, what are your
Yeah,
non-event related radio advertising for your foundation?
I think radio is fantastic. So I think radio is a great medium, mostly because it's all happening in the donor's head. I think radio is an underused medium I think it always has been, because it's a medium where the listener actually creates the story, that's the essence of donor-centered fundraising. The donor creates the story. So I think using radio, I think the important part always, and we shouldn't back off this, folks. We need to be tangible with our expectations. When we do that, and this is what our donors deserve, by the way. When we spend money and we work at it and we try to do legacy programs, we try to spend money on these programs, we owe it to them to be targeted, specific, tangible. You'll see at the bottom of the love story, with those of you who come to Montreal, you see the last line is something called metrics. How do you know this actually works? And so I think radio is a great medium as long as someone tracks what actually happens. I know that our friends at the Nature Conservancy, and you folks will know this if you read Canadian Geographic or Zoomer or other magazines, you'll see that they sometimes put full color ads in those magazines. They cost a lot of money. And to their eternal credit, NCC knows exactly what kind of response they've had from those ads, and they know that they're worth it.
You know, that just ties into another question somebody posted a little further down, which was, do you think ads in Zoomer and seniors living magazines, etc., are worth the investment?
Yep, because because our friends at Nature Conservancy of Canada have proved it. Now, the ad needs to be great. It needs to be not about you. It needs to be about the reader. It needs to be a good ad, and it also needs to be part of what I would call a strategic legacy program. You can't kind of drop all this stuff. You can't do one-offs, okay? These programs are, in fact, the word we use sometimes is legacy dust, sprinkling legacy dust. Everywhere you go, there's this sort of flavor of, oh, this organization really wants me to think about what's important to me, and they're there to help me do what's important to me. So in the context of strategy, as if magazine ads in Zoomer and other magazines are part of a strategy, and they are tracked, by the way, then the answer is yes.
Great. Here's another question. In my experience and speaking to fellow plan-giving people in my area, donors are not very keen in meeting face-to-face nor attending events. Numbers of people participating are dwindling. Are we alone, or are others finding this as well?
Well, I think the more we know, the more we find out about legacy fundraising, the more it becomes very clear. And this, you're not alone, by the way. Everybody's finding out that lots of legacy donors are not that keen to have a face-to-face conversation. I mean, for heaven's sakes, you're coming to talk about them dying. I mean, put it in some kind of perspective. I know the gift is not about death, but the person coming to their house with their envelope and the brochure and the annual report, I mean, they're just going to remember that this is something that's going to happen after they're gone. So I think you got to be really it's about starting a conversation. It's about allowing those people, and by the way, there are lots of them who will pick up the opportunity to have a conversation, but it's laying the groundwork, it's planting the seeds to foster an intelligent conversation about what's important to you, why does it matter, why do these things matter to you. So and as for legacy events, I mean, we sell out all of our legacy events when we take donors for walks in nature. They just don't. People love to do that. So it's just not a matter. It's a matter of what kind of event. Now, as I said earlier, a sign outside of 7:30 with coffee and cookies, where a financial planner is going to talk about the latest in the tax advantages, they are doomed to failure, because all that says to a donor is death, death, death. And no wonder people don't line up to go. Sorry for being so blunt, but there you go.
Good answer. We have 5 more minutes left, and we still have a few more questions. You're good to keep going, David?
Oh, yeah. I'm delighted to spark a little bit of interest. Let's go.
Great. Okay, so another question. I've done legacy giving in healthcare. Now I'm in the environmental field. What are the unique
Congratulations. Congratulations on the upgrade.
what are the unique characteristics of environmental legacy donors?
Well, actually, if you're from the health field, you've been in the environmental business all along. You've just finally come out. Um, I think it's just a matter of people have strong personal connections to the environment. They have just, now, as you know, in the health field, God knows, they have strong personal connections with disease. God knows they have strong personal connections with disease. But um, there are hugely personal examples of Canadians reveling in the natural world. Margaret Atwood has written about it. We're actually known around the world, I think, for our love of nature. Even in the middle of winter, for God's sake, we like nature. So um, I think it's a matter of tuning into the fact that, first of all, a healthy environment will help health issues as well. So I think it's great. It's great news. And if that person would like to email me for a little more, bit more, less scattered answer, I'd be happy to respond.
That's great. Thank you. Would targeted postcards to our most loyal donor prospects be worth investing in, or is a targeted letter more effective?
Depends what you want them to do. If you want them to sit by the fireside and take 30 minutes to think about a legacy gift, that doesn't happen in a postcard. If you're going to send a postcard and invite someone to a lovely nature event at Tommy Thompson Park to see the blackberry warbler, which is a picture I showed you guys when I did the nature event, dynamite. It's a really good idea. Postcards are great. They're lovely. They're friendly. They're simple. They're visual. But I would never. A postcard does not do what a 4-page thoughtful letter, which has to cover a few bases, like making sure the family comes first and you're richer than you think, and a bunch of other stuff that we've learned out over years of how it works.
Okay, great. Another one, 80% of our donor base was born prior to 1950, many Civics. Do the same strategies apply for securing PG interest? Many may be on limited incomes and may have already done their wills.
Great question. I think you've got what you have there is a very what's the word for it? You've got a garden full of potential. I think the thing to do is to scatter some passionate seeds and see what happens. I mean, among the obvious things is to make sure you're communicating with great huge font types and other things, and don't get too fancy with design and other things that some people can do, especially if they're older donors, and also play into the motivations. These people they do feel obligation. They do have a sense of community. They do feel they want to give back. It's a very more traditional than boomers are. So some of those phrases and some of those feelings and motivations, I would be sure that you reflect in some of the material that they get, because you're going to reflect back the kind of, and if you go online and Google civics and ask questions about what their essential the values are, you'll find out all sorts of cool stuff. Reflect those values back. In the legacy business, we're in the values business. We're in the business of drawing out and then celebrating values. And so the more you can find out what the values of those people are, the better your legacy offer will be to them.
The next question is not unrelated. It's, is there an age, upper age, that you would suggest not cultivating legacy prospects?
No.
Okay.
Nope. That's if it's done properly, let the prospect decide. It's not right. I mean, if it's done properly, no.
But honor the children.
Yeah, you have to honor children. I mean, you can't be unethical with this. But no, I don't think there's an age at which, as I said, this is about giving a person a chance to do something they've wanted to do all their lives, which is have their values perpetuated forever. Which, by the way, is the reason that people who have grandchildren, this is a bit of a tangent, but I'll say it anyway, which is why people who have grandchildren are 5 times less likely to leave a legacy gift. Why is that? Because they've already left the legacy. When people scratch their head and say, well, I wonder why that is. Well, it's bloody obvious. I've got my legacy. I've passed my values on to my grandchildren to the extent they're paying attention. But so it's I don't think there's any age where we don't want to allow donors the chance to make this transformative gift in their lives.
So David, we do have a couple more questions, but I think we should hold it there. As everybody can see, you've got your email address on the slide, that second last slide there. And just to remind everybody, you do have access to the slides in the login email I sent you. There is a link to a Dropbox folder that has a slides in it. So you have access to it, and everybody can email David. Bombard David with emails.
Bombard me with emails. Absolutely right. And even phone me, for heaven's sakes. I'm keen. I'm obsessed.
There you go. There you go. Very passionate. Okay. So I'm just going to say a few words before we tie things up. You will be receiving an email shortly with a link to the recording and a short survey to complete as well. We'd really appreciate it if you could take a quick moment to fill out the survey, because it gives us valuable feedback for David, as well as it helps us planning our future webinars. And please join us for the next webinar of our Webinar Wednesday series, which is on November 28th, presented by Roger Lee, called Details Matter, Ensuring Your Charity Gets the Full Benefit of Its Legacy Gift on November 28th. And as David mentioned, the 26th National Conference on Strategic Philanthropy registration opens next Wednesday. So be sure to visit our website next week for all kinds of information. We're in the middle of loading it all up right now as we speak. So David, thank you so much for presenting today. Thank you, Jen, for the moral support in the background. I look forward to seeing you both at the conference, and thank you again for presenting. I hope you all have a great week.
Thanks, Erin. It was great.